Over $1 million invested, for months of the Yukon mining season consumed, and his entire financial future on the line. The strategy was brutally straightforward. Drill down 150 feet into an ancient gold-bearing riverbed and pull out enough ounces to completely turn the season around. Instead, his excavator operator Bailey had punched through 25 feet of dead clay in every single test hole, wall to wall, no color, no pay. With only 7 weeks remaining before the Yukon freezes and the season shuts down permanently, Rick is sitting at fewer than 500 ounces when his target is 1,800. The clay just keeps going, another 25 feet down at minimum. That's simply too much ground. Too much for what's left of this year. He still needs 1,300 more ounces just to hit his number. Right now, all he has to show for $1 million commitment is dirt. And that unrelenting clock is burning through what little time remains. The point of no return. For months into the mining season at Dawson City. And the numbers are grim. Rick's season target stands at 1,800 ounces. His crew has recovered fewer than 500. With 7 weeks until the Yukon freeze shuts everything down, hitting that goal would require more than tripling current production in a fraction of the time remaining, and doing it with a crew already pushed to its absolute limits. The slope drops sharply right there and keeps going. He dug 25 more feet down trying to find something. Under any reasonable assessment of the situation, it simply cannot be done. But Rick Ness did not build an operation on Duncan Creek by accepting reasonable assessments. Valhalla is his answer, his bet, a massive, expensive, years-in-the-making wager on an ancient dried-out riverbed that Rick believes runs 150 feet below the surface across 4 miles of his Duncan Creek claims, the same pay layer that proved out beneath Raleigh Valley and Vegas Valley. A 50-foot streak of coarse gold was supposed to appear here at the same depth. Geologically, the logic holds. The ancient channel follows a traceable line. Rick mapped it carefully before he committed a single dollar. He ended up committing more than 1 million of them, and not just money. Time, crew wages, equipment wear, for months of opportunity cost across the entire operation. Valhalla consumed the season it was meant to rescue. Rick went in knowing this was an all-in move, because a cautious, measured approach cannot produce 1,300 ounces in 7 weeks. Only a massive push into a proven ancient channel could even come close. That was the plan. That was the entire plan. Bailey has been working down in the cut for over a month, digging toward that pay layer. He follows the slope of the channel, punches test holes at regular intervals, probes the edges, and watches carefully for any change in color or any shift in the material coming up. Nothing. He digs further. Still nothing. He crosses to the other side of the cut and tries again. 25 feet of clay. No end to it. Rick climbs down into the cut himself to see it firsthand. Bailey walks him through every test location, shows him exactly where the excavator reached its physical limit, exactly where the clay layer starts, and exactly how far the dead zone extends in every direction. Bailey has now gone 25 feet deeper than originally planned, pushing the machine as far as it can physically reach, and every single bucket comes up the same way. Pure, featureless, gold-free clay. No gravel, no pay, nothing. Bailey has tested every key reference point across the entire cut, and the result is consistent throughout. The ground does not lie, and this entire zone is dead. Rick stands there and stares at the walls of the cut he paid $1 million to open. Somewhere below the clay, maybe 10 feet further down, maybe 50, the ancient channel is almost certainly still running. The pay is almost certainly still there. His geological read was almost certainly not wrong. It just wasn't close enough. And in gold mining, close doesn't move gold. Parker's problem. While Rick is absorbing the worst news of his mining season at Duncan Creek, Parker Schnabel is managing his own timeline crisis at the Golden Mile, and it's about to cost him 24 hours he cannot afford. Parker is chasing 10,000 ounces this season. It's an enormous target, but Parker doesn't build his seasons around safe numbers. He had shut down both Lucifer and Big Red, his 2 primary wash plants, mid-stretch, specifically to excavate the final pay dirt from the Golden Mile pit and stage it into large, processable piles. The logic was clean. Get all the pay out of the pit and into position, then run both plants simultaneously at full capacity for the final weeks. Maximum material, maximum throughput, maximum gold. At the finish line, the pay piles are built. Big Red needs to be repositioned, moved a full mile down the valley to sit directly beside the new material. Every hour the plant spends sitting idle on a lowboy instead of processing pay dirt is gold staying in a pile rather than flowing through the sluice box. The complication is Tyson. He's Parker's most experienced plant move operator, and he's at his sister's wedding. Family comes first, nobody disputes that, but the timing couldn't be worse. The job falls to Brennan Rualt. Brennan is a seasoned dirt mover and no one questions his ability behind a machine. But he hasn't moved Big Red in 5 years, and a plant move at this scale is not something you want to be rusty on. Brennan openly admits he's feeling the pressure before Parker heads to the airport, leaving behind one blunt instruction: don't break the wash plant. Moving a plant is always a big responsibility, and Brennan is honest enough to admit it gives him real anxiety. With 2 pay piles the size of small mountains waiting to be processed, there's a lot riding on getting it right, and an honest acknowledgement from Brennan that he cannot guarantee a flawless outcome. Mechanic Alec Kelly steps in to help Brennan haul Big Red 1 mile down the valley on a lowboy trailer. The numbers involved are not small. The main body of Big Red weighs 50 tons and stands 21 feet tall. Getting it off the trailer and onto its new pad requires Brennan to maneuver his own 58-ton excavator to the very edge of a 50-foot embankment drop, walking the tracks carefully down the slope to push the plant sideways into position. One wrong move and the excavator goes over the edge. He takes it inch by inch, track by track, and threads the needle cleanly. The plant lands on its pad. Clearance looks right. Not bad at all. Brennan exhales. Then Alec inspects the radio stacker, the 200-foot conveyor belt system that feeds raw gravel into Big Red, and discovers that the metal clips holding the belt together are nearly destroyed, for seams are in critical condition. One clip failure mid-run and the entire belt shreds, shutting the plant back down under far worse circumstances than a planned replacement. The call isn't complicated. It's just painful. The belt has to be replaced before they start. 6 to 8 hours of additional work, which guarantees Brennan will miss Parker's night shift deadline by a full day. 24 hours of downtime on a plant sitting right next to pay piles the size of small hills. Every hour Big Red isn't running is gold staying in the pile instead of ending up in the gold room. Those 24 hours have a real dollar value, and it's a painful one. Brennan doesn't cut corners. He gets the new belt properly installed, checks every connection, and has Big Red running cleanly. When Parker checks back in, the delay is acknowledged on both sides. Brennan stands behind the decision to replace the belt rather than risk a catastrophic mid-run failure. Parker flies back, walks the setup personally, pad position, belt condition, plant alignment. The work is done right. No shortcuts anywhere. Despite the lost day, Parker is satisfied with the execution and says so directly. Big Red is running Golden Mile pay dirt again. Parker is back on the clock. And Rick Ness is still standing in a clay-choked hole at Duncan Creek, trying to figure out what comes next. Soul searching in the Yukon. The pay layer is still down there. Of that, Rick is almost certain. The ancient channel runs beneath Valhalla. The geology supports it. The pay proven in adjacent valleys supports it. And nothing Bailey found in those test holes disproves it. It's just deeper than Rick's equipment can reach this season. To get below the clay, Bailey would need another 25 feet of excavation depth that the machine currently cannot deliver. Getting there would require a complete reconfiguration of the cut. The Yukon doesn't grant extensions. 7 weeks from now, this season ends regardless of where the clay layer stops. Rick describes the moment as a smack to the face. He knows exactly how much work his crew has poured into this cut, and the clay result forces him to honestly confront whether all of it was worth the cost. That question has no clean answer at this point in the season. Bailey is solid. The full crew of 7 has been grinding brutal hours all season. They've moved more dirt than some operations process in an entire year. They've shown up for every shift, run the equipment hard, and done everything Rick asked of them. The effort is not the problem. The execution is not the problem. The ground delivered a result nobody had planned for, and that's the only problem that matters now. Rick stands at the cut for a long moment, then asks Bailey for a minute alone. He walks away, not visibly angry, but clearly needing space. What's going through his mind is not something he can process in front of other people. He went all in on Valhalla, staking his own money and his own name on the bet. And right now, the cut is telling him it won't pay off this season. He doesn't take it out on Bailey. He doesn't throw equipment or start assigning blame. He comes back, acknowledges Bailey's honest assessment, and starts thinking through what options remain. But he carries the real weight of it alone. Rick admits openly that nobody knows what lies beneath the clay and that the operation has to figure out its next move quickly. And here's what makes that even harder. Rick actually does have a sense of what's under there. He's been studying this ground for years. He believes the pay is real. What he doesn't know is whether there's any path to it within this season. With 7 weeks on the clock and a maxed-out excavator, the answer is almost certainly no. He doesn't put any of that into words for the crew. Not because he wants to hide it from them, but because saying it out loud makes it real in a way he can't walk back from. Rick has said explicitly that he doesn't discuss this with his crew, doesn't discuss it with anyone, because the moment he speaks it aloud it becomes real, and once it becomes real, he loses the ability to manage his own reaction to it. 7 people are depending on him to have a plan. Equipment loans don't pause for clay layers. Suppliers don't care about geological anomalies in the Valhalla section. Rick is the one who bet big, which means Rick is the one who has to find a path forward through the math, through the options, through the very specific and very difficult question of what the next 7 weeks can actually produce. Rick says he can handle it, that he has been handling it, but that some days the sheer weight of it is simply too much. That is not weakness. That is a man who has been carrying $1 million problem alone for weeks, refusing to let it crack him in front of the 7 workers who depend on his judgment, absorbing a level of pressure that would break most people, and still showing up every morning to find a way through. The real stakes. Rick came to the Yukon to build something that lasts, not to collect a season paycheck and go home. He has said it plainly. He wants to mine until he's 100 years old, on his own ground, making his own calls, answering to nobody but the earth beneath his feet. He didn't come here to run someone else's operation or grind out safe, comfortable seasons. He came to build something real, permanent, and entirely his own. Valhalla was supposed to be the proof of that vision. Not a recovery season. Not a survival season. A breakthrough, the year that demonstrated the Duncan Creek claims were everything Rick believed them to be, and that the gamble on going independent was the right call all along. Rick has put it in stark terms himself. This entire Valhalla endeavor, he says, could be the thing that makes his entire life or the thing that destroys it completely. There is no middle ground in that statement, and he isn't saying it for dramatic effect. He is doing the math out loud. $1 million committed to a cut that is producing nothing but clay. Fewer than 500 ounces in the gold room. 1,300 ounces still needed. 7 weeks remaining. The numbers don't soften when you say them aloud, and Rick has never been the kind of man who looks away from them. Vegas Valley and a number with 7 zeros. Tony Beats pulls up at Duncan Creek unannounced that afternoon. Tony walks Rick down into the Vegas Valley cut. A section opened last season that exposed a bedrock shelf dropping 50 feet into a natural channel. The pay at the bottom runs at roughly a 3-to-1 overburden ratio. No drill holes required. The structure is already open and readable. Tony has been reading Yukon ground for decades, long enough to have seen every possible version of this situation. He doesn't waste time on dead zones. Vegas Valley has gold in it. The exposure proves it. The question isn't whether the ground is worth mining. The question is whether Rick can gather the resources to go after it at the scale it demands. Tony is direct. Attacking Vegas Valley properly means going in heavy from day one, 10 trucks minimum, maybe 15, maybe 20, all running at the same time. Significant capital committed before a single ounce comes out of the ground. Go in light and the strip ratio eats you alive before you ever reach pay. Tony puts it simply, it takes a lot of gold to get gold out of ground like this. That is a considerable understatement given Rick's current position. Rick listens carefully. He has been in this business long enough to read between those words. Vegas Valley is real, but the way Rick is currently positioned, he probably can't attack it at the scale it requires. Not this season, and possibly not next season either, depending on how this one ends. Then Tony raises something entirely different. $50 million. That is what Rick's 4 miles of Duncan Creek claims could be worth at current gold prices. Tony raises the idea of selling, not as a threat, not as a sales pitch, just as a number that deserves a serious response. The Yukon is full of men who were right about the gold but wrong about the timing. Men who had the best ground on the creek, who were absolutely correct about what was in it, and still ran out of capital before they could prove it in a way that actually paid them back. A serious buyer would understand exactly what they were purchasing, the proven pay, the channel mapping for miles of documented claims, and would have the capital to go after Vegas Valley at the scale it actually requires. $50 million. 7 zeros. Tony makes his case and lets it sit in the air between them. Rick listens to every word. He thanks Tony, shakes his hand, and watches him drive back down the valley road. Then Rick just stands there, alone in the Yukon afternoon, with that number somewhere in his head. When is enough enough? Rick has described the experience of having a figure like $50 million placed in front of him as genuinely difficult to process. It is hard to walk away from a guaranteed exit when the alternative is grinding through 7 more weeks toward a target the math says is nearly unreachable. Rick isn't a man who gets pushed out of things before he's ready. He has built his entire career on exactly that quality, the refusal to fold when pressure mounts, the ability to hold his ground and work through it. When he went independent and staked Duncan Creek, everyone understood the risk. He took it anyway. When early seasons ran lean, he pushed through. That has been the pattern across 14 years. But the question he's wrestling with now isn't simply about whether to fold. It's about whether the fundamental geometry of the situation has changed. Tony's $50 million isn't an attack on Rick's confidence or his judgment. It is a legitimate exit, one that would clear the debt, cover the crew, and let Rick walk away with something real instead of fighting a 7-week battle he probably can't win on the numbers alone. At what point does holding the line stop being the right decision? Rick describes a pattern he keeps running into. Every time he feels like he's getting ahead, something pushes him right back to the beginning. There's no self-pity in how he frames it. It's an honest accounting of 14 seasons chasing ground that always seems to require 1 more year of investment before it finally delivers. He isn't walking away from the ground. Valhalla is still real. The pay layer is still real. Next season, with the right equipment and the right approach to that clay barrier, the ancient channel is reachable. Rick believes that. He has not stopped believing it. But believing in the ground and surviving the current season are 2 entirely different problems, and he has 7 weeks to solve both. Rick came into this season wanting to walk away with everything. Instead, he is now asking a much smaller question: whether he can survive financially long enough to reach the point where the gold starts flowing back. He came to the Yukon at 30 years old, 14 years ago. He has joked about aging 40 years in that time. He does not seem to find it funny anymore. Tony's number is still sitting out there somewhere. Bailey is still in the cut. The freeze is 7 weeks away, same as it was this morning. Rick Ness's $1 million Valhalla gamble is falling apart, and the only person who can pull it back together is standing alone at the edge of a clay-choked cut, staring down into a hole that should have been full of gold. The gold is real. The ground is real. The cost of reaching it is real. If you want to see exactly how this season ends for Rick, for Parker, and for every crew still running iron in the Yukon, subscribe and hit the bell, because none of what is coming is going to be easy.